The signal broke every rule of known communication, arriving in a frequency no longer used, encoded in a language no longer spoken, yet somehow perfectly timed to pierce through the artificial silence of the Orion neutral belt, forcing every listening outpost into full alert, as if the void itself had spoken aloud and dared someone to answer Admiral Raylan Ward. The senior Earth representative to the Concord had read the translation 6 times before speaking, not because he didn't understand it, but because he did, and because what he understood made his blood feel colder than the vacuum of space. The message repeating every hour without deviation or pause. A dead voice from the ancient dark, whispering a warning that wasn't meant to be heard. It begins when you mock. Ward was not a man given to theatrical fear, shaped instead by 32 years of diplomatic service and field command, known across military channels as the kind of leader who didn't flinch even when surrounded, the kind who once diffused a bio-war standoff using only a bottle of Terran whiskey and 4 hours of patient reasoning. But even he found something about this signal deeply wrong, like it wasn't a message to them at all. It was a message about them. Beside him, Commander Savitron, a neural analyst with double doctorate honors from Europa Station, and the youngest officer to hold a Level V cryptology clearance, was already buried in waveform modeling, her eyes flickering with data stream overlays, her voice steady but threaded, with urgency as she said, "This pattern isn't just language, Admiral. It's behavior modeling. It's responding to prediction variance. Like it knows what we'll say before we finish saying it." Back at the Concord Hall on Station Concordia Prime, the response was swift and dismissive. As expected, the Viric stratagem mocked the human concern outright, their first intellect, declaring through rigid, calculated speech that such anomalies were the result of Terran superstition meeting random quantum resonance, while the Atran triad regarded the issue as nothing more than an entertaining curiosity to be catalogued and then ignored, and only the core hive envoy seemed remotely interested. But even that interest felt more like hunger than concern when Ward took the floor. The atmosphere was colder than the mineral bones of the station itself, and yet he spoke with a calm, deliberate weight that made even the mockers pause. His voice measured and deeply human. The ship was found beyond navigation bounds, drifting dead but preserved. Its systems still alive in ways that don't align with any known technology. Its signal broadcasting on a frequency that hasn't been in use since before your species achieved coherent warp. And yet here it is, speaking to us in a dead Terran dialect, coding logic warnings and extinction patterns, connected to no fewer than 5 disappearances across 3 sectors. He paused, only briefly, just enough to allow silence to stretch like drawn wire, then continued. "We have cross-verified energy traces. We've identified decay patterns consistent with mass-scale annihilation. And in all cases, this signal appeared days before the event. What I am telling you is not a proposal. It is not a theory. It is what is happening, and you are not prepared." The chamber did not erupt, because such things did not happen in Concordia Prime. But the shift in posture from the delegations was immediate skepticism from the Viric curled. Into polite scorn, the Atran triad whispered among themselves in multitonal cadence, and the core spoke aloud only once, a single phrase from their 6th mouth, translated by implants into common tongue. To mock is to forget history, and history eats the forgetful. Yet no alliance was formed, no resolution passed. No call to action made. Ward's request for joint surveillance was refused. His offer of full data transparency declined, and as the delegation dispersed under the assumption of human overreaction, Seva turned to him, eyes dark with quiet calculation, and said what they were both thinking. "They don't believe us, Admiral. They're not going to listen until something disappears while they're watching." He didn't nod, because it wasn't necessary, because he already knew what came next. And as Earth's diplomatic envoys returned to their ship in silence, the signal kept playing, relentless, unchanged, and somehow more final each time it repeated. 3 days after Concord dismissed Earth's warning, the Atran colony of Jathal ceased to exist, not through war or plague or any known catastrophe, but through something far stranger, a kind of surgical erasure where entire orbital rings, moon stations, and planetary mass vanished mid-rotation, leaving no radiation, no debris, and no distress call, only an afterimage of magnetic turbulence and a single delayed hyperspace echo that repeated the now familiar phrase in chilling clarity. "It begins when you mock, Admiral." Ward received the news during a mid-level security briefing on Mars Outpost 4 and didn't speak for nearly 20 seconds after hearing the transmission. Not because he was shocked, but because he was already updating Earth Command's threat models in his mind, recalculating the political fallout, the probable fractures within the Concord, and the percentage chance that this loss would be the only one required to force the others to finally understand that this wasn't human hysteria or overreach. It was an extinction-grade event following a deliberate, escalating pattern on Concordia Prime. The reaction was immediate and predictably divided, the Atran triad demanding a full investigation while simultaneously accusing Earth of fabricating the event using high-level deception protocols. A claim which Commander Savitran met with such cold, precise evidence that their spokesperson retracted the accusation mid-broadcast, clearly shaken by the fact that humans had quantum telemetry of the destruction already mapped and analyzed, before the Triad's own data cores had even updated the Viric, ever arrogant, refused to attend the emergency summit in person, sending instead an AI proxy shaped like a living crystal, which calmly declared that Viric systems were unaffected, and therefore uninterested in what it termed regional anomalies. Its logic circuits too hardened by centuries of internal superiority to recognize that their turn was coming. Meanwhile, Earth assembled its own coalition from those willing to face the threat directly, not from within the Concord High Table, but from its periphery, the outer clusters where curiosity and survival make more than political standing, the Yuldari fractal traders, eccentric and ancient, committed 5 scout vessels after parsing the signal through their religion code matrix and interpreting it as a sentient judgment waveform, while the core, colder but more pragmatic, deployed 3 entire war fleets under the command of their internal warcast, acknowledging the pattern with brutal simplicity. If one can vanish, all can vanish. The combined task force was placed under the strategic command of Rear Admiral Ilana Rourke, a human officer whose reputation had grown legend across both Terran and neutral systems after leading a 12-month resistance campaign through the collapsing gates of the Sirius insurgency, where she had once dismantled blockade fleet using misdirection, solar tides, and no energy weapons at all. Rourke did not believe in luck or prophecy, but she trusted in patterns, and the one unfolding now had all the precision of a trap built, not to lure, but to punish those who looked too long without learning. Her first act as fleet commander was to issue a full-scale procedural lockdown, banning all active scans, all energy pulses, and all AI-led decisions within 100 million kilometer radius of the last known signal burst, replacing standard systems with human-staffed analog monitors and fallback communication relays. Designed during the earliest days of interstellar war, and when questioned by the alien captains under her command, she answered with a single sentence. It held no emotion, but all the weight of earned authority. This isn't a threat you fight with power. It's one you survive by understanding how it thinks. The core followed without hesitation. The Yuldari hesitated only briefly, and the humans, already aligned under her quiet discipline, began what history would later call the first protocol. Convergence, an alliance born not of trust, but of necessity, drawn together by something older than politics and far more dangerous than war, and still, beyond the edges of their combined sensors, something moved through the dark, silent space between systems, not fast, not loud, but inevitable, and with each passing hour, the signal grew slightly clearer, the warning slightly louder, and the pattern slightly more complete. When the frontier colony of Leaden Drift went dark, no ships moved, no weapons fired, and no systems failed. The entire settlement simply fell into absence, recorded in one moment and gone in the next, leaving behind a smooth silence where raw vacuum should have roared. And though sensors picked up no energy discharge or spatial anomaly, a Terran beacon stationed 5 light minutes away caught a 7-second gap in time itself, as if causality had been folded and cut by an invisible hand that had no interest in being seen. The shadow of the black ship stretched longer with each loss, but it was no longer a metaphor. Rourke's task force drones, operating under total M silence and piloted through direct neural interface from safe orbit, captured subspace movements too structured to be cosmic noise and too slow to be conventional fleets, like outlines of ships half present in physical space, casting no heat, no sound, and no signature except for the distortion they left behind in gravity waves and neural pressure, a phenomenon the Yuldari began calling the Ghost Wake 1 core. Warship, against protocol, activated its primary sensor suite to verify anomalies, and it vanished within 6 seconds of system ignition. No flash, no scream, just the end of telemetry, and then nothing. Its entire command hierarchy consumed without struggle or warning, leaving behind only a brief static burst across human comms, in which Seva later extracted one decrypted frame of visual data. The black ship, perfectly still, pulsing with faint, inner blue light like a heart, remembering how to beat the decision, was immediate and absolute. Rear Admiral Rourke initiated Protocol Null, stripping the task force of every form of automated analysis and reverting operational hierarchy to analog systems. Handwritten logs and quantum-linked courier beacons launched by hand from armored bays, an act that drew incredulity from her alien allies until she explained, flatly and without apology, "We are not dealing with something that sees us as enemies or allies. We are dealing with something that recognizes patterns and pride, and the more we act like we know what we're doing, the closer we come to being judged." Earth's stealth corvettes, running on pre-fusion engines and lined with analog shielding foam, entered the last known kill zone as bait, faintly broadcasting the same Latin-encoded signal back toward the anomaly site to draw it out, while the rest of the task force held back, anchored in high orbit and running only on emergency life support and passive scans, waiting, watching, listening. The signal returned not as language, but as motion adrifting. Black shape emerged slowly from the void, not under propulsion, but pulled, perhaps, by gravity or intent, its surface utterly lightless, except where brief flickers of circuitry traced along its frame like veins under skin, revealing nothing of its purpose, only its attention. And then, for the first time, it allowed something to approach. Human insertion teams were dispatched in 0M drop pods, their approach unpowered, their systems shielded, their training drilled down to heartbeat synchronization, because Rourke had ordered no AI, no active logic cores, no unnecessary cognition, a demand so extreme that Seva herself volunteered to override her implants manually. Her voice calm but low as she said, "If it thinks it understands us, it has to see something it doesn't expect." Inside, the black ship was not a place but a condition. Corridors existed, but only as ideas that formed around human presence, reshaping constantly, as if deciding whether the crew deserved to understand what they were seeing. And when they reached the central chamber, they found it pulsing with a drive core that registered as gravitational collapse and time dilation, and something entirely unknown. A system not built to power the ship, but to filter judgment, responding not to threat, but to behavior. The walls were covered with embedded messages, etched in dead languages from civilizations long gone, some still remembered, most never recorded. Message of final warning, each written before vanishing in the exact same manner. And at the center of the chamber, was a silent beacon pulsing with one phrase in Terran Standard, freshly translated and gently blinking in the center of the interface. You were not the first to mock. Rourke's voice, when she received the transmission, was calm, unreadable, but every officer near her felt the tension ripple under the stillness as she gave her only order that day. Mark the systems that disappeared match each one to these languages and histories. We're not chasing a weapon, we're reading a verdict. It was Saga who first realized the black ship was not simply reacting to presence, but to posture, that it responded not just to contact or interference, but to the manner in which it was approached, its systems aligning in ways that matched tone, strategy, and emotional undertones from the crew, as though it was measuring not technology, but intent, absorbing not data, but attitude. And the records from within made the pattern undeniable. Every civilization that vanished had done so after. They dismissed the signal. After they ignored it, defied it, or most fatally, mocked it. Each vanishing was preceded by a moment of arrogance, by a declaration of superiority or a refusal to adapt, and the more advanced the species, the faster. Their fall came, their achievements repurposed into etched final phrases inside the black ship, not as trophies, but as tombstones, short sentences, unflinching and damning, earned into metallic walls like eulogies, carved by a higher intelligence that did not forgive failure to learn. Rear Admiral Rourke called an emergency conclave with the remaining fleet command, including human analysts, corps generals, and Yuldari memory scribes. And for the first time in decades, a military gathering began not with strategy, but with philosophy. She stood at the center of the command deck, not pacing, not raising her voice, but speaking in firm, even tones that made every word cut through silence like steel through ice. This thing, this entity, this protocol, it doesn't kill out of aggression. It kills out of design, triggered not by action, but by belief. And the pattern is precise. It moves on the civilizations that assume their understanding of reality is complete, that dismiss anomaly, that weaponize ignorance. And right now, we're on the edge of qualifying. There was no argument, not anymore. Not after the last system went dark during a broadcast where a Viric envoy laughed at the warning on open comms. And that broadcast, captured and replayed endlessly across the black ship's interior, had already become another inscription on its walls. So Earth proposed something it had never proposed before. Not a weapon, not a countermeasure, but a humility. Broadcast, composed not as apology, but as a statement of historical accountability. A full-spectrum transmission that laid bare humanity's past failures, the wars it regretted, the arrogance it had overcome, the lessons it had taken centuries to learn, and most importantly, the open declaration that Earth did not believe itself. Ready to understand what the black ship truly was, the message was short, deliberate, and read across all open bands. We mocked. We were wrong. Teach us what we must correct. They expected silence. They prepared for vanishing. Instead, the stars held still. 3 weeks passed without another disappearance. No more colonies fell. No ships were erased. And then, without announcement or fanfare, the black ship began to move not through engines or propulsion, but with the kind of slow inevitability reserved for natural forces, gliding silently across thousands of kilometers toward Earth's lunar defense perimeter and stopping in perfect geostationary orbit above Luna's dark side. There was no threat, no energy surge, only a single transmission sent to every Concord outpost, every listening station, every academic node, and every military channel in every known language. You may proceed. It was not permission. It was recognition that the ship did not vanish. It did not hide. It settled above Earth like a sentinel or a scar, and humans, for the first time in Concord history, were no longer questioned or dismissed. Instead, the alien powers began to reconfigure their diplomatic structures, restructuring command chains, embedding Terran advisors into their war councils and educational corps, not because they feared human weapons, but because they could no longer deny the results of Terran thinking. And through it all, Earth remained quiet, issuing no demands, claiming no territories, refusing to profit from the fear now spiraling through the galaxy. And Rourke, who had become something of a living myth, gave only one statement when asked about the change in political gravity: "We were never the strongest, just the first to listen." They called it the temperance shift, the political realignment that followed the Black Ship's silent judgment. And though the Concord refused to give humanity a formal title of power, they gave them something far more lasting: deference. And, in some cases, quiet reverence, born not from fear, but from the uncomfortable realization that Earth had survived by following a principle that others had abandoned centuries ago: restraint, the Viric stratagem. Once the most mathematically rigid of the great powers, quietly retired their supremacy doctrine and opened their defense archives to Terran ethicists for recalibration, requesting quiet consultation, never publicly, but always with urgency. In their encrypted transmissions, the core hive, who once saw all diplomacy as camouflage for war, integrated human tacticians into their neural strategy lattice, adjusting their genetic memory cues to include Earth's concept of strategic uncertainty, the idea that not knowing all variables was not weakness, but preparation. Even the Yuldari, who had laughed during their first meeting with Admiral Rourke, invited human scholars to walk their infinite reefs, recording centuries of oral memory that had never before been offered to non-Yuldari species. And they asked only one question in return: "Do you believe the ship will choose again?" Rourke never answered that question directly, but her actions made her position clear. She transformed Earth's Outer Defense Initiative into a neutral observation body, not just a fleet, but a council of minds, composed of analysts, historians, philosophers, and signal interpreters, with no intention of expansion, no requests for territory, and no deployments without direct cause. The Black Ship remained in orbit above Luna, never moving, never pulsing, but always present. And over time, it became a pilgrimage site for scientists and leaders across the galaxy, not for answers, but for perspective, a place where questions mattered more than solutions, and silence was not absence, but discipline. Some believed Earth had reprogrammed the ship, that they had done something inside it that no other species had managed, but the official records remained sealed and unaltered. And the only thing Rourke ever said on the subject during a closed military summit was this: "We didn't tell it what we were. We showed it what we chose not to be." Peace, for a time, held Dot, and then, one morning, without warning, without announcement, a second ship appeared, not drifting, not black, but silver, polished like a mirror, humming with harmonic tones that weren't language, but resonance, floating in low orbit over Europa, as naturally as if it had always been there. There were no warnings this time, no disappearances, no judgment, just a signal sent only once, delivered through quantum burst to Luna Base, and relayed directly to Admiral Rourke's personal command line. "Are you ready to remember?" The words contained no threat, but everyone who read them felt the breath tighten in their lungs, not because they feared what would come, but because they sensed this was not a continuation, but a new phase one that would not punish, but reveal. Rourke read the message in silence, then turned to her staff, calm as ever, her voice steady in that way that always meant something larger had already begun to unfold in her mind. "We were not the first. We won't be the last, but we are ready." And as the silver ship drifted closer to the planet it had chosen, the Black Ship, long dormant, released a single, low pulse in response, one note, deep and resonant, echoing across Earth's oceans, and through every layer of its atmosphere, as if confirming that whatever came next would not be a test of strength or knowledge, it would be a test of memory. And Earth, for the first time in the long history of galactic civilization, did not fear. what it might remember.